event would come to define everything about my life moving forward. What I remember about the accident is mostly a collage of backdated comments I was able to reel out of my father in the following years. He was driving me and my mom in his old '91 Chevy Tahoe through the twisting back roads of southern Illinois, weaving his way through the gnarled branches of oak trees which interlocked into a braided ceiling overhead. A fog had rolled in, giving the impression that we were driving through a cloudy tube. Everything was simultaneously bright and opaque. I don't mind though, as I was in the back seat working on a coloring book. My mom was in the front, talking with my dad or turning around to entertain my completed pictures. Although I was the age where my memory was just beginning to mature, I still recall two things very clearly from the accident. First was the sensation of braking. I remember feeling the way a plate must feel to be dropped, weightless at first, then suddenly meeting a much larger, more solid object. The air popped like a firecracker, and the entirety of my body shattered into hundreds of fractals. And then I remember a hand. It was my dad's hand pulling me from the wreck. I ended up hospitalized for weeks after the crash. My mom was less lucky. The impact had killed her instantly. As I've alluded to, I was young, and at the time I didn't fully understand the implications of what had happened. I knew something was missing, but it was like a word on the tip of my tongue, or the forgotten vanilla in a cherished cake recipe, coloring my experience, but not the whole of it. Not like my dad. For him, it was the whole cake. He had somehow made it out with only a few scratches. I'm sure he had a really bad case of survivor's guilt, and frankly, looking back, I wouldn't have blamed him if he slumped into despair and spent his days drinking away his sorrow. But he wasn't that type of person. He got help. It took him years before he was able to recall anything that happened that morning, and most of it is still repressed, but he shared with me what he could. Or at least, that's what I thought. My dad was a middle school teacher since before I was born, and he kept his job until very recently. As a result, we didn't have much by way of resources. I grew up on Disney Channel and TV dinners for the most part, but I didn't mind. When I became of school age, his job actually made caring for me pretty convenient. Since our elementary and middle schools were connected, he was able to drive me there and back each day. It was around 3rd or 4th grade that I realized I was different. I didn't understand the other children or even the adults most of the time. They would say things, then immediately change their mind, or they would talk about something and in the next breath forget its existence entirely. I remember one day at lunch, I had just gotten my tray of hot food and sat down with some friends. One of the kids, Alex, was talking about a stuffed bird he had won for getting first place in Mr. Curtis's pop-up math competition. We were all admiring its blue wings and white belly and sharp black beak and beady eyes. I left mid-conversation to get a chocolate milk. When I came back, I asked to see the bird again, and Alex said, "What bird?" I was perplexed. "The bird was crazy. I figured they were all playing a prank on me, so I got up and went over to Alex's seat and crouched down, looking under the table. Then I sprung up and tried to open his lunchbox. "What are you doing?" he yelled. I felt so confused and embarrassed that I ran to the bathroom to cry. Then there was another time that a group of kids were laughing about a joke one of the girls, Taylor, had made about our homeroom teacher's face looking like a seal. I knew it was mean, but at the time I just wanted to fit in, so I played along. But when I made a comment about her resemblance to this semi-aquatic animal, they all looked at me confused. "What are you talking about? We never said that." These misattributions kept happening, and it led me to being ostracized from most of the little childish cliques that popped up. I developed a quasi-standoffish temperament, which I used as a shield against a chaotic world that I did not understand. My dad eventually had me tested for ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, but I passed the test. He asked if I wanted to move to a different town with different schoolmates, thinking that maybe I was getting bullied, but I told him I was fine. Somewhere deep down, I felt like no matter where I went, this problem would follow me. You may think that I was simply coping with the absence of my mom, and while I'm sure that her absence has left certain holes in my life, kindly know that is not what was happening. You see, at first, I did not notice the instances of what I'll call blinking. I simply thought that I was misremembering things, objects, words, and events. They were all little things anyway. A bird, a joke, my pencil box. It wasn't until 6th grade that I realized the magnitude of the phenomenon. I was in my dad's 6th grade social studies class, and we had just been assigned our Ancient Civilizations project, which involved creating a diorama of chosen civilization and presenting its features to the class. My friend at the time, Claire, had taken my first choice of ancient Rome. And then, in parentheses it says, which we got into a heated argument about at lunch. So I was left with ancient Egypt. At the time, all I pictured for Egypt was a plate of sand. However, my dad and I went through some illustrated history books and pictures on the internet, and he really built up the project for me. Over the course of a couple months, he helped me shape 3 pyramids out of small wooden planks and a bunch of tan clay. We placed them in the center of a giant square shoebox lid, which served as the container for the diorama. Then he bought some small wooden mannequin puppets, and we dressed them up in cloth clothes and colored their eyes, mouths, and hair. We added a few obelisks. I'm not sure what that is, but I hope I'm saying it right. And some small box huts, which were collected into a little village around the Nile. Finally, we added a light glaze of glue where we felt would be necessary, and then covered the whole project with golden glitter. As we worked on each part of the diorama, my dad helped me understand what we were adding and why it was important to ancient Egypt. I loved the way that he talked about history. He spun everything into a miraculous story. To this day, I don't think I've ever close to his level of charisma and creativity. As a result, I became very proud of my diorama. I memorized all the little details and rehearsed my speech in front of the mirror for hours leading up to the last couple weeks of class. And then, 2 days before I was supposed to give my presentation, everything fell apart. First, I need to apologize for deceiving you about an aspect of my story. I thought it might help you to understand what I was going through at the time. What I am about to tell you is going to sound insane. I get that, but please hear me out. The truth is that I was never assigned to present on ancient Egypt. Everything else about Claire taking my first pick and my dad helping me with the whole project and my excitement leading up to the presentation was all true. But it was not a project on ancient Egypt. It was a project on ancient Sidovan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right as well. Which was a civilization located on the 8th continent called Catalan. And in parentheses it says, the same name as the spoken language, but unrelated, which was due west of Australia in the Indian Ocean. I know this sounds incredible, and if you want to believe it's all in my head, I get that. But I remember clearly all sorts of facts about it. The Malagasy, the same people who populated Madagascar, were the first people to discover Catalan and settle it. However, about 500 years later, Indian ships would arrive and create the civilization known as Sidovan, a pidgin language formed between the indigenous population and new arriving Indians called Ayesa. Catalan had a warm climate with plenty of natural resources, but Sidovan had a dense enough population to require agricultural production. They grew rice, grain, sugarcane, vegetables, and even tobacco. I remembered all of these facts and more. My diorama reflected the main features of the Sidovan civilization. And then, 2 days before my presentation, I woke up and my diorama was completely different. The hilly grasslands were traded out for sandy dunes. The Hindu statues and stone palaces became clay pyramids and large spear-like pillars. And everything was covered with the ickiest yellow glitter I had ever seen. Tears stung my eyes as I trampled over to my dad's room and banged on his door. "Dad, what did you do?" I yelled. "Honey," he responded, rushing over to the base of the stairs. "What's wrong?" "The diorama. It's ruined." "It's what?" he asked and ran up the stairs, leading me to my room. He looked over it for a few seconds, checking to see if everything was intact, then said, "I don't see it, honey. Where is it ruined?" I was completely dumbstruck. What did he mean he didn't see it? "All of it," I shouted. "The whole thing is wrong. Where's the grass and the stone buildings and the lady with the 4 arms and the elephants? Where is my project?" My dad looked at me in silence. "Lauren, baby, what civilization do you think you were working on?" "Ancient Sidovan, of course. We've been working on this for months now. Dad, please tell me you remember." He knelt down and put his hands on my shoulders. "Honey, your project was on ancient Egypt. There is no ancient Cedovan. You're lying, I protested. Books. You have books on your bookshelf. He took me into his study and showed me all of his books. None of them were on ancient Cedovan. He even turned on his computer and typed the name of the civilization, but all that came up was a near-match Zidane. I remember feeling the sudden urge to throw up. My entire body felt like it was pumping battery acid instead of blood. I fainted. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I had lost consciousness for over half an hour, enough time for my dad to call 911 and have the ambulance transport me to the nearest ER. They ran all sorts of tests on me, but they all came back fine. After a couple hours of IV fluids and monitoring, they released me with my dad. I ended up skipping the rest of school that week. My dad didn't make me present my diorama. In fact, he never brought up the subject again. Part of me was glad. I just wanted to forget the whole thing ever happened. But another part of me could not move past what was clearly the most absurd thing to ever happen to me. About a week after the incident, I tried to bring up the subject, but when I asked my dad about it, he did not seem to remember our conversation at all. He said I had fallen ill, and that's why I needed to go to the ER and miss class. I felt like I was going crazy. If I was older, I probably would have voluntarily checked myself into a psychiatric ward. But I was young, helpless, and alone, and I decided that if I just ignored the changes well enough, I could still get along. This proved difficult though, as the blinking would only exacerbate in the coming months. Up until the time of the project, I had not been able to directly observe the phenomenon. It was always in retrospect that things disappeared. It was during the summer after 6th grade that this changed. I still remember the first time it happened. I had just gotten out of the shower and was drying my hair in front of the mirror. After it was dried, I threw on my clothes and then went to tie up my hair in a ponytail. But as I went to set the elastic tie, I felt its weight dissipate in my hand. I gasped and held my hand out. The circular black band was gone. Fast forward to 7th grade, and the blinking had spiraled out of control. Reflecting back on it, most people would probably have assumed that I was drinking psilocybin-infused water, as the delusions were somewhat consistent with the psychedelic phenomena, except these distortions were real. I'd wake up and grab the box of Special K, but end up eating Cheerios. The McDonald's logo would look yellow and red one day, but purple and black the next. I'd be watching a show, and then a different show, and then a different one. It was as if the entire universe was a Christmas tree filled with millions of lights, and the lights kept shifting hues randomly, faster and faster, and I was the only one who could see their changing colors. I remember one night my dad made spaghetti for dinner, and we went out onto the porch to eat it. While we were sitting, I saw our neighbor's house, a 2-story townhome, blink and become a single-story bungalow. I gasped, and my dad asked me what was wrong. But when I tried to explain, he just gave me a strange look. For him, no matter what changed, the world was always that way, while for me, it didn't have a way. The situation peaked when Claire, the friend I had mentioned before, disappeared. I texted her. My dad had bought me a BlackBerry at the beginning of summer break, but I did not get a response from Claire. When I asked her other friends if they knew where she was, I got the usual, "What are you talking about?" look. I knew right away what had happened, even though I didn't want to believe it. I went to the teacher and asked if there was a Claire in our class. She said no. I broke down in front of everyone. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of school. The lady at the front desk tried to stop me, but I barreled past her. I kept running until I got to a big park across the street and pulled my eyes out until the police arrived and escorted me home. When they tried asking me what was wrong, I didn't say a word. There was nothing I could say that they would understand. That night, I prayed to God for the first time. My dad was not a religious man. He went to Catholic church with my mom when she was alive, but after she died, he never went back. Still, I knew how to pray, even if I never did. I copied some of the people I saw praying in movies and interlocked my fingers and knelt down on my bed, stuffing my head into a pillow. "Dear God," I said, "please, please, please help me." I told him about my struggles and asked him to make them stop. I spent an hour saying the same things over and over again. And when I was finished, my body was so tired, I fell right to sleep. I knew something was different the second I opened my eyelids. I didn't only feel relieved, but I felt embraced. I felt like someone was watching over me. I felt like I wasn't alone. I moved through my day with cautious apprehension. I didn't want to get my hopes up only to be let down. But to my surprise, the blinking had stopped. At least I couldn't remember any of the inconsistencies. And to me, that was a win. I began to pray regularly, and the more I did, the more I could feel the sense that someone was looking out for me. It was like I was getting a big hug from some cosmic force that loved me and that wanted me to be happy. I made it a habit to pray regularly. I asked my dad if he could take me to church, and he agreed to take me to St. Mark's, the same church that he and my mom used to attend. Over time, I realized that the actual church services weren't as important to me as the praying. For whatever reason, there was something about praying that was like a glue for my brain, holding the entire universe together. As I got older, I considered that maybe it wasn't that the changes were no longer happening, but that I simply didn't see them anymore. In other words, maybe I was just becoming like everyone else. Either way, I didn't mind. In my teenage years, I got into mindfulness meditation. I thought that I'd want to go into religious studies and become a theologian, so I started to learn about Eastern traditions in addition to Christianity. I joined a bunch of different school clubs to meet kids of different faiths: Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. I tried to find a common thread, which linked them all and would explain what happened to me as a child. The metaphors of heaven and hell, good and evil, duality. Every religion seemed to speak about a way of being that would lead to a better place. In some cases, that better place was a physical future existence, and in others, because it was merely being in contact with the perfection of nature or the present. Metaphorically, the teachings could explain what I had gone through in a kind of loose way, but there were no explicit statements about my condition. I want to fast forward to why I've decided to share this now, to give you an idea of where I'm at. I'm now 25 and working on finishing my master's degree in computational linguistics. I know that's a bit of a switch from what I was thinking when I was a teenager, but I really only interested in religion because of the value praying afforded me as a child. I didn't actually have much interest in the subject itself. After my first year of college, I changed to an English major, which ultimately led me taking a linguistics class and enjoying it so much that I switched tracks in my junior year. Considering the state of the world, I thought minoring in computer science might help me financially in the future, so I ended up charting a path which I figured might lead to something like developing translation software. Anyway, everything was going fine until a few weeks ago. I was out at an all-night diner with a few of my friends from the program. There was Jeremy, Martin, Bella, Jordan, and Macy. We had been working on a group project involving modeling construction grammars by generating primitive 3D structures and running the code through a game engine. It's a bit weird, but essentially we were trying to create a multi-dimensional model for language using a similar, more advanced concept other than LLMs, and we just had a breakthrough. It was 2 a.m. though, and not a brain cell existed between the 6 of us, so instead we focused on a different problem. Maisie's ongoing breakup with her semi-long-distance trucker boyfriend. We tried to explain why Mike wasn't going to work out as we ordered a round of milkshakes and waited for the lone overnight kitchen worker to scoop out 3 balls of ice cream from the Dean's carton for each of us, blend it, then have the same server deliver the vintage diner glasses on a plastic tray. I dug into my thick strawberry shake with a spoon. It was delicious. I kept eating but focused back on the conversation. I remember feeling something odd about one of the scoops, but I was so entrenched in Macy's story that I did not take notice the metal shard in my ice cream until I felt it against my lip. I spat out the shard and ice cream all in one motion, then covered my mouth, which I was sure was bleeding. The silver blade was probably as large as my thumb, and it had 2 jagged edges, as if it was fastened for the purpose of causing damage. "What the heck?" I yelled. Everyone at the table turned to see what the matter was. "Hey, Lauren, are you okay?" I spoke through a covered mouth, using my free hand to point at the table. That was in my, but it was gone. "In your shake? Was something in your shake?" asked Jeremy. I froze. In that moment, the stories of my childhood that I had only remembered as faint nightmares came back in a wave of crushing terror. How could I have been so stupid to think that they would simply vanish forever? No, this isn't the same thing, I thought, but deep down I knew it was. I drew my hand away from my lips and saw that it was dry, no blood. When I looked back up, all of the blood in my veins went cold. My friends were smiling at me. Their lips were I saw her concerned expression, I relented. "Sorry guys, I think I'm going to have to call it," I said. "You sure, Elle?" asked Jordan. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Yeah, thanks, but I stumbled for a lie, but when one wouldn't come, Martin stood up and said he'd walk me out to my car." "Thanks," I said as I got into my little 2015 Jetta. "It's just been a long day." "No problem, Lauren. You know, if there's anything..." "I know," I said as I cut him off. "Some things just couldn't be shared." I drove for about 5 minutes before stopping at a gas station. I pulled in and parked near the back. Then I interlocked my fingers and prayed for half an hour. I apologized for not taking my praying seriously and asked once again to be granted peace. Unlike my younger years, I also drifted into other avenues of thought. I imagined my mom. I pictured the whole arc of my life. All of the little decisions that led me to where I was. I cried for a long time. I felt like that little girl again reaching out for help. I still felt so lost, so out of control. There were so many things missing, and I was so confused. I decided then to take a trip back home and visit my dad, who was now working as a private tutor. He made enough prepping affluent students for the ACT and SAT that he could spend his free time pursuing his real passion, reading and writing. When I arrived at his doorstep that weekend, he greeted me with open arms. "How are you, kiddo? It's been what, a year or so?" It was actually more like 2 years, but I didn't tell him. I just smiled and nodded. "Well, come in." The house was almost exactly how I remembered it. Beige walls, a few scattered pictures, the scent of chamomile. Everything minimalist. There was a quaintness, a prettiness to the way everything seemed to be well kept and in a perfect place. From the cherry wood chairs we'd sit in to eat to the cream-colored love seat, I felt at home. I spent the drive thinking of what I would talk to my dad about, but ultimately I wasn't sure what to say. I loved my dad, but I think growing up it was easy to see him as naive. After all, arguably the most important episodes of my childhood were completely unknown to him. In that way, I kind of loved him from a distance. Maybe losing my mom also played into that. Maybe I just had trust issues. And after what happened at the diner, luckily there had not been any blinks since. I stayed for a couple days, and he showed me around some of the different coffee shops where he'd tutor kids or write some of his stories. I met some of his friends, mostly other retired or part-time teachers who were in a similar place in life. I was happy for him. Then, on Sunday, he made me my favorite meal growing up. Homemade carbonara pasta with chicken and broccoli. The sauce had a few different cheeses, butter, olive oil, and a raw egg yolk. It was the perfect blend of creamy, savory, and sweet. After we ate, he cracked open a scrapbook of old photos and other clippings he had put together. We reminisced about the past and laughed whenever I'd cover up one of my awkward pictures. He brought up some stories from school that I had forgotten, naming some teachers that I hadn't thought about in years. Apparently, I had started at the end because as I moved to the other end of the book, It was headlined, "To Survive Head-On Collision." After a cursory glance at the end, I noticed something odd. It said, "Both the husband and child, a 3-year-old girl, sustained life-threatening wounds. The husband was found unconscious on the scene. The girl was found 20 meters away from the vehicle crying." I swallowed, trying to remember what happened that day. The feeling of crashing, of the world slowing down, then breaking, returned. And then there was a hand. My dad's hand, or was it? If he was unconscious, who pulled me out of that wreck? I looked up at my dad. He was smiling. I shot up and started backing up slowly towards the door. "No, not you too. What is this? What's happening? Who are you?" My dad, or whatever was controlling him, laughed. "Oh, Lauren, 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 you know who we are." He purred as he stood up. He lifted his hands and the lights began to flicker, then bend in a way which should not have been possible. Dark figures began to propagate from the shadows along the walls. The pictures nailed there began to blink out of existence. I turned to run towards the door, but the handle was gone. Glass shards materialized all around me and swarmed like locusts. I was certain I was going to die. I dropped down on my knees and once again turned to prayer, this time asking God to directly intervene and save me. Everything went quiet. "Honey, are you okay?" I didn't trust his voice. I knew if I opened my eyes, I'd see that awful smile. He was just toying with me. "It's not you," I said between muttered prayers. "I know it's not you." "Honey," my dad said, closer. I felt his arms wrap around me. This was it. I was going to be suffocated. I waited for the inevitable crushing weight of my chest collapsing. I waited to break all over again. "I would never hurt you, Lauren. I love you more than anything in the whole world." I burst out into tears. "No, it's not you. I know it's not you. You don't exist." My dad's weight dissipated. I opened my eyes and saw that he was no longer there. "Dad," I called aloud. "Dad, where did you go?" I checked all over the house, but there was no trace of him. There were still pictures of him all over the house, so I knew he hadn't blinked out of existence like everything else, but somehow he was missing. I left the house and got a room at a hotel, where I am at now. I'm sure at this point that whatever is happening to me is no longer random. Something out there is actively trying to hunt me. Maybe it has been my whole life, but only now it can see me. However weird that sounds. If that's right, then God has been on my side trying to protect me from this demon or monster or whatever it is. Regardless, the methods I was using when I was younger are not going to cut it anymore. I already posted my story in several other small circles and have gotten one reply. A man who goes by the name of Trent. Apparently it's an alias. He said that he has some insight into my condition and can offer help if I want it. I'm planning on meeting with him tomorrow. I'm not sure if it's a good idea, but at this point I need answers. I can keep you updated with my progress if that interests you. And to anyone who knows anything about what's happening to me, please. I could really use your help. was just about to post this when Trent sent another message. This is what it says. We can do the blank at blank o'clock. Also, if what you're telling me is true, your mother may still be alive. And that's the end of the story. Wow. Yeah, that's the end of the story. And everyone in the comments is asking if there's a part 2, but the user just posted it 10 hours ago. That's crazy. No Sleep is for original scary stories, but it does say that you can share personal true stories, so some of the comments think that this is true, but I'm not sure what to make of it. That's crazy. What do you guys think? And obviously this is going to be a very long video, so I will leave it at that. But please share